I froze. Before my eyes, that hand, the same hand that held mine at our wedding 40 years ago, was now gripping Sarah's hand, my daughter-in-law. In the dim kitchen, under the wash of yellow light, I heard Robert whisper every word, clear as day. I've waited for this moment far too long. My heart felt crushed in someone's fist. The air turned solid. I couldn't believe my ears. Sarah, the daughter-in-law I had once loved like my own child, lifted her eyes to my husband with a trembling smile, full of unspoken meaning. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from a fear, an earthquake I'd never known in my life. I backed away. My spine slammed into the wooden door. The sound was small, but it boomed in my skull like thunder. I wanted to scream, to hurl myself at the grotesque scene and rip it to shreds, but my throat was sealed shut. Robert, the man I trusted, the one I thought would be the only shoulder left when old age came. Sarah, the daughter-in-law. I had wept for joy over when my son brought her home, and she bowed her head and called me mother. Now they stood together, as if the world contained only the two of them. With every passing second, I felt the memories of my life crack apart. Every meal I cooked, every penny I hoarded, every prayer I sent up for my family, all of it shattered into pieces. Robert squeezed Sarah's hand tighter, his eyes glittering like a young man rediscovering his first love. My stomach clenched. Sarah's thin fingers trembled, but she didn't pull away. On the contrary, she leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. My God, what am I seeing? Heat surged up into my skull. My heart pounded wild. I wanted to rush in and scream, "Robert! Sarah! Have you both lost your minds?" But my legs were shackled, heavy as iron. I swallowed hard, the burn spreading down my throat. Tears welled and blurred my sight. I bit my lip, refusing to let a sob escape. If I screamed, this family would explode right there. If I stayed silent, I would die slowly, eaten alive by betrayal. Between those two roads, I could only stand there, petrified. Darkness flooded the kitchen, but my chest felt darker still. I heard Robert whisper again, voice low and fervent, "I can't wait any longer, Sarah." Sarah bit her lip and nodded. In that instant, I knew it was over. The family I had guarded for decades was about to turn to ash. I turned and ran, each step heavy as if treading on broken glass. Every footfall echoed through a house once filled with laughter, now hollowed out by cold betrayal. I asked myself, why me? How dared they trample my heart like this? Robert and Sarah's figures burned into my vision, two people holding hands in the very house I had built with blood and tears. And in that moment I knew the nightmare had only just begun. Dorothy was born in a small town where tin roofs were bleached by the sun and dirt roads turned to mud after every rain. She didn't have a dreamy youth, no far-off trips, no time to call her own. While her peers still played beneath the trees, Dorothy rose at dawn to carry bundles of vegetables to the market to help her mother feed the younger kids. Need taught Dorothy to grow up fast. She didn't know how to pout, didn't dare to dream big. For her, happiness was a full meal, a roof that didn't leak, and a man who would love her. Then Robert appeared like a life preserver in a churning river. He wasn't rich or handsome, but there was something in his eyes that made Dorothy believe. He promised, "I'll take care of you for the rest of my life." Dorothy heard that and gave him all her youth. In the early years of their marriage, they had nothing but a rented room half the size of a kitchen. At night, they spread a torn mat and lay listening to the rain drum on the tin roof. Robert worked as a laborer. Dorothy hustled, selling odds and ends and sewing for hire. They held hands and believed tomorrow would be different. Then their firstborn son arrived. Dorothy gathered him into her arms and forgot her exhaustion. Night after night, she nursed him while mending Robert's shirts. Robert would often murmur, "You're the rock of this family." Those simple words kept her going. As their son grew, Dorothy shouldered even more. Every coin she earned went to his schooling. She didn't buy herself a new dress for 10 years. Silver crept into her hair, calluses thickened on her hands, but her heart stayed warm, convinced that sacrifice was worth it if it meant her child had a bright future. Then came the day her son brought Sarah home. Dorothy remembered crying, not from sadness, but from joy. She saw Sarah, the polite, gentle girl who held her son's hand and called her Mom in a shaky voice. Peace washed over Dorothy. At last, her son had a home of his own. She believed she had gained a daughter to keep her company in old age. Dorothy didn't know that behind that sweet smile, a hairline crack had begun to form. All she saw then was love. On the wedding day, Dorothy stood in the kitchen all morning, fussing over every table, every chair. She didn't care about compliments or criticism. She only wanted a perfect beginning for her son and Sarah. When she watched them walk hand in hand into the ceremony, her vision blurred with tears. Robert smiled then, hooking his arm through hers. "We did it, Dorothy," he said. For her, it was a complete moment. After years of hardship, all she wanted now was a peaceful home, a grown son, a dutiful daughter-in-law, and a husband by her side that would be enough. In the years that followed, Dorothy kept tending every family meal. She knew Sarah wasn't handy in the kitchen, so she did it all. "Rest, you have more important things to do," she would say, genuinely believing she was helping. Every night Dorothy waited up for her son and Sarah, bowls and chopsticks laid out, a hot soup on the stove so they could eat together. Once Sarah laughed and said, "Mom, why work yourself so hard? Rest." Dorothy answered, "Working hard makes me happy, so long as you're fed and warm. I'm strong." She believed their affection was real, that her daughter-in-law loved her back. With age, Dorothy grew quieter. She no longer dreamed of travel or fancy clothes or jewelry. What she guarded most was this house soaked with memories from nights of rain when she used blankets to shield her child, to the first time Robert brought home a bunch of wildflowers to place in a cracked vase. Every brick, every door was damp with Dorothy's sweat and tears. To her, this house was her entire life. She believed her son and Sarah would live here and keep the home fires burning. One afternoon, Dorothy was mending Robert's old shirt. Sunlight slanted through the window, dust motes floating. She thought, "My life isn't glamorous, but it's enough." Then she smiled and set down the needle. Suspicion had never yet brushed her heart. But in the very instant Dorothy felt most secure, the undertow began to stir. She just didn't see it. Some mornings Dorothy rose before the sky lightened. Dew clung to banana leaves. Wind moaned through the yard. She shrugged on a worn coat and lit the stove. The pot of rice often held a handful of grains mixed with sweet potatoes or corn, but she rinsed and measured as carefully as if preparing a feast. Back then, Robert left for the construction site at dawn and returned at night, his work brutal and his pay meager. Dorothy never demanded anything. She did everything she could to keep the family afloat. She sold vegetables at the market, then took in sewing. Her fingers were punctured and tough, dotted with blood. Once, their son fell terribly ill, shivering with fever. Dorothy held him all night, pressed warm cloths to his skin, brewed ginger tea and forced him to sip. They had almost no money left. She stared at the tiny gold earrings, her mother's only wedding gift to her, then slipped out to sell them. When the bills were in her hand, she felt relief that her child would be saved, and a stabbing pain as if a fist had closed around her heart. Robert could only look helpless. He took Dorothy's hand and whispered, "I'm sorry." Dorothy smiled and shook her head. "Don't be. As long as our son is healthy, I can bear anything." That night, rain hammered their leaky roof. Dorothy cradled her son, a thin blanket draped over his small body, her eyes wet in the dark. However poor they were, she whispered in his ear, "Sleep, baby. Tomorrow, the sun will rise." Decades passed, but the memory stayed etched in her heart, part warmth, part unhealed wound. On sweltering summer noons, Dorothy sat by the window, hands flying over her sewing. The little house baked like an oven. Sweat beaded her brow, but she didn't dare stop. One finished shirt earned only a few coins, but those coins, pieced together, bought school books. Many times her son asked, hesitant, "Mom, can I have money for a class trip?" Dorothy went still. She looked at his eager face, turned away as if busy, and said in a wavering voice, "Sweetheart, we don't have much. Maybe next time." That night, after he fell asleep, Dorothy quietly pulled a few wrinkled bills from under her pillow, the money she'd saved to buy herself tonics, and tucked them into his school bag. In the morning, when he shouted with joy, she smiled as tears gathered. To save money, Dorothy taught herself to mend old clothes. She reversed the collars on Robert's worn shirts, stitched the edges, and got a few more years out of them. As her son shot up, his clothes grew tight. She cut and patched and turned them into new. As for herself, she wore the same few faded outfits for nearly 10 years, always washed clean and ironed smooth. In the kitchen, Dorothy stretched every scrap. A small fish she cut in half, bulked with wild greens from the yard, enough for everyone. When only a little rice remained in the jar, she toasted it golden and made a thin porridge, telling fairy tales to distract from hunger. At night, when Robert came home late, he would watch her toil and sigh. "You work too hard, Dorothy." She turned, resolve shining in her eyes. "As long as we're together, I don't feel the hardship." Dorothy never thought of herself as noble. She believed that as a wife and mother, keeping her family together was simply what one did. That simple faith made her stronger than anyone. Hard years forged Dorothy into steel. But deep down, her heart stayed soft. She wanted only a peaceful home and a whole family. One winter cut to the bone. Wind shrieked through the gaps in their doors. The little house shuddered as if it might collapse. Dorothy wore a frayed sweater, held her feverish son close, trying to shield him from the razor wind. There were only a few coals left. She lit them. Smoke stung her eyes and still didn't warm the room. Her son coughed and burned with heat. Dorothy pressed her palm to his brow, fear knotting her gut. Medicine money had run out long ago. In her pocket lay only a few coins. That night she did something she still remembers in detail. She knocked on a neighbor's door to beg for fever pills. She was ashamed, eyes red, but bowed and whispered, "Please, lend me a few tablets for the boy. I'll repay you as soon as I can." The neighbor took pity and handed her some. Dorothy clutched them like treasure and hurried home, cooled water, crushed the pills, and coaxed them into her child's mouth. When his fever broke, cheeks less flushed, breathing steady, Dorothy finally exhaled. She sat up all night watching him sleep. The wind howled outside, but a small flame sparked inside her. "No matter how hard it gets, I'll protect him. No one will take him from me." In the morning, Robert saw her dark-ringed eyes and cracked hands. He was silent a long time before he placed his rough palm over hers. No promises, no grand plans. Just the grip of two people bracing against the storm. Dorothy believed in that grip. She believed that if they stood together, they could survive anything. To repay the neighbor, Dorothy woke earlier, took more odd jobs, sweeping the market, hauling water, washing dishes for the noodle shop. Her thin shoulders sagged, her back bent. She never complained. She told herself, "If I earn a little more, my son can eat better, have proper books." Their meals were plain: morning glory soup with fish sauce, a few pieces of braised tofu. Once in a while a small fish. She gave it to Robert and their son, keeping the head and bones for herself and chewing the leftover greens. Sometimes Robert protested, "You eat too, our boy can take the rest. You're wasting away." Dorothy just smiled. "I'm used to it. It's nothing." During harvest, Dorothy reaped rice for hire. Under blazing sun, her back bent. Blisters from the sickle bled. Each tied bundle earned a few coins. At night, she dragged her numb feet home, and when she saw her son studying by the flicker of an oil lamp, the weariness lifted. As he grew, costs multiplied. Dorothy even sold the lone wedding band Robert had given her to cover tuition. Her lips bled where she bit them as she set the ring in the jeweler's hand, but she smiled when she saw her son walk into class with a new school bag. And sometimes the pinch was so tight Dorothy borrowed at the market. People knew her to be honest, so they lent with a warning. Pay on time or it'll be shameful. She cradled the money in trembling palms, ashamed, afraid, and fiercely resolved. So long as my boy doesn't drop out, I can swallow the humiliation. Those years left her no time for herself. Day after day, she lived by a single faith, that every callus and every coin brought her son closer to a better life. Late at night, with her family asleep, Dorothy sat alone beneath a wavering oil flame, mending rips. Her eyes blurred, her hands shook, and still she whispered a vow to herself. This family I will keep it whole, whatever it costs. Time moved on. The hardest years slipped behind them, but in Dorothy's memory, they were as sharp as yesterday. Leaking roofs, the three of them huddled around a little pot under a torn sheet of plastic. Wind screaming on the porch, rain battering the walls while she told stories to chase her son's fear away. Her son grew into understanding. Once, seeing Dorothy gasp for breath after a long day, he ran to her, took her rough hand, and said with a catch in his voice, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big house. You won't suffer anymore." Dorothy smiled through tears, ruffling his hair. "Just be decent. Study hard. Become a good man, that's everything to me." That faith was her greatest strength, the single engine that kept her standing through those long, hard years. Robert, clumsy as he was, still comforted her at times. He once brought home a scraggly bouquet and said, "I don't have anything fancy, just want you to smile." Dorothy looked at the wilted flowers and felt warm. In poverty, even the smallest love could heat a heart. When her son graduated, Dorothy cried for a long time. She stood in the schoolyard and watched the child she'd raised with sweat and tears in a graduation gown. The salty tears weren't grief. They were proof that all those years had meant something. She was sure her sacrifices had been worth it. Then came the day her son brought Sarah home. Dorothy thought she could finally rest. With a partner beside him, her boy wouldn't need her to worry over every meal and every shirt. She looked at Sarah with a mother's love, as if she'd found a long-lost daughter. Dorothy believed her family was whole at last. That belief was as pure and simple as the faith she'd put in Robert's grip and her son's smile for so many years. She had no idea that from that very moment the cracks had begun to show. But Dorothy still didn't see. She sat in the familiar kitchen, still sewing, still cooking, still smiling gently, unaware that the storm was right outside her door. It started with little things so small that if she hadn't been careful, she'd have missed them completely. Late one night, Dorothy woke to whispers in the living room. Thinking her son had come home late, she went to open the door. But passing by, she froze. Robert held a phone to his ear and spoke in a lowered voice. "Yeah, see you tomorrow, but don't let her find out." "Her." Dorothy heard the two words ring out in the dark. A strange feeling shot through her. She pressed her palm to her chest. Robert had never called her that. He used to say, "my wife," or "Dorothy." When did she become her? When Dorothy stepped out, Robert startled and shoved the phone into his pocket. He forced a smile. "What are you doing up?" Dorothy said softly, "Heard you talking, thought it was something urgent." Robert avoided her eyes and mumbled, Called an old friend about a loan. That's all." Dorothy nodded, but a seed of doubt took root. What kind of friend calls at midnight? She wondered. Then she scolded herself. Don't be paranoid. He's doing business. Maybe late calls are normal. A few days later, Dorothy caught Sarah on the porch, phone in hand, looking rattled. When Dorothy stepped out, Sarah flinched, shoved the phone into her pocket, and forced a smile. "Mom, I was just calling a friend." But Sarah's eyes wouldn't meet hers. They slid away, and her voice shook. Dorothy only smiled and didn't pry. She believed Sarah was a good, well-mannered girl. Maybe it was just private young people stuff. Still, a small stone slid into Dorothy's heart and bumped the once smooth memories. Those vague signs started to keep Dorothy up at night. She lay listening to stealthy footsteps in the hallway, the whisper of a door. Their home's warmth no longer flowed. Thin cracks snaked through the meals and the glances. Dorothy didn't know this was only the beginning of a much larger nightmare. One afternoon, folding laundry in her room, Dorothy heard voices from the kitchen. Robert's deep tone interlaced with Sarah's soft giggles. At first, Dorothy smiled, thinking, "How nice they get along." But when she drew closer, one sentence froze her in place. Robert said, quiet as a breeze but clear, "It would be so much better without her." She went numb. Her hands shook. The shirt fell to the floor. Her heart hammered. She didn't know if he meant it as a joke or something else, but the words pierced her mind like a pin. Dorothy stepped out and pretended she hadn't heard. They both fell silent and turned with stiff smiles. Robert coughed, flustered. Sarah chimed in quickly. "Mom, I was asking Dad to help me move a few things, and he started telling old stories, made me laugh." Dorothy nodded and kept her smile, but frost settled inside her. After that, she paid attention. Robert found excuses to go out at odd hours. Sometimes, right after dinner, he grabbed his coat, "A friend needs me," and didn't return until late. His phone lay face down on the table, never face up like before. Sarah changed too. She sat alone a lot, sometimes smiling at her screen and quickly closing it when someone came near. Dorothy asked once, "Who's making you smile like that?" Sarah forced a laugh. "Oh, just a friend, Mom." Nothing. Explanations that sounded reasonable only made Dorothy feel more estranged. The house thickened with silence. Robert stopped meeting her eyes. Sarah's smiles turned brittle. Dorothy felt like a stranger in the kitchen she'd lived in all her life. At night, Dorothy tossed and turned. Is it just me getting old and suspicious? Or is there a secret in this house I haven't uncovered? Her unease grew, clinging to her day after day. One morning, while tidying the living room, Dorothy found a small slip of paper tucked inside Robert's notebook, a cafe receipt in the city, time-stamped midday, the hour Robert claimed he'd been in a meeting at the site. What made her freeze was the signature at the bottom, Sarah. Her hands shook so hard she nearly ripped it. Questions screamed. Why did Robert have this? Why was he with Sarah? When did they meet without me knowing? When she asked them outright, Robert frowned and answered too quickly, as if rehearsed. "Oh. Sarah needed me to drop off some paperwork that day. We just sat for a coffee." Sarah bobbed her head beside him. "That's right, Mom. I forgot to tell you I didn't want you to worry." Dorothy pressed her lips together and slipped the receipt back. The explanation sounded plausible, but the way they spoke in chorus so smooth made her throat tighten. It felt like staring into a fogged mirror, shapes visible, details obscured. From then on, little things multiplied. Their glances lingered too long. When Dorothy entered a room, the air would suddenly still, as if she'd cut a thread. The scattered pieces piled up in Dorothy's mind, late-night calls, forced smiles, forgotten receipts woven into a dark tapestry. One night in the dark, Dorothy felt Robert roll over. Thinking she slept, he reached for his phone. A pale glow lit his face. Dorothy shut her eyes, heart thudding. She heard him sigh and murmur, "I miss you." She bit her lip until she tasted blood. She wasn't sure if she'd heard right, or if her mind had conjured it, but the words sliced into her. The next day, watching Robert read the paper, Sarah bustling over breakfast, and her son oblivious, Dorothy felt herself pushed to the edge of the family she had built. A low fear erupted. What if my intuition is right? What if all my years of sacrifice trade down to betrayal? She had no idea that the blurred surface hid something fouler still. That noon, sunlight slashed through the window in thin blades. Dorothy cleaned the old wooden wardrobe in their bedroom, the one that had creaked for over 30 years. She only meant to straighten some papers, but when her hand pressed the bottom panel, she felt a looseness. She pushed. The board popped up. Beneath lay a thick envelope bound with a cracked brown rubber band. Her heart pounded. Sweat slicked her cold palms. She slid into a chair, laid the envelope on the table, and opened it. Inside was a stack of documents stamped in heavy red. Transfer of land use and house ownership. Recipient, Sarah. Consenter and witness, Robert. The room tilted. Dorothy gripped the table edge so she wouldn't fall. Her eyes ran down lines of words, cold, precise, without a drop of humanity. Date of signing, 2 months ago. Venue, a notary office downtown. There was also a power of attorney. In bold, Party A, Dorothy, authorizes Party B, Robert, to conduct all legal procedures related to transfer of property. Below was space for Dorothy's signature. In the copy in her hands, the Dorothy at the bottom was a clumsy scrawl, nothing like her hand after decades of signing her name. Dorothy shook. Her throat tightened as if an invisible hand squeezed hard. She dragged a breath into heavy lungs. The ticking wall clock grew shrill, each second a hammer on her chest. She turned another page and found a non-disclosure agreement between Robert and Sarah, words oiled and slippery. Do not disclose to any third party, including family members. The word family twisted like a knife. The dark kitchen, the guilty grip of hands. I've waited too long. All flashed before her and snapped together into a hideous picture long hidden. She lurched to her feet, knuckles white on the table. Stay calm, Dorothy. Maybe it's a draft. Maybe dropped uselessly to the floor. There was also a deposit slip. Amount, $150,000. Note, buyer has transferred deposit to recipient, Sarah, per agreement with representative, Robert. Her palms burned. $150,000, those were her blood and sweat, nights without sleep, the wedding band she'd sold, her mother's earrings, bowls of thin porridge all reduced to cold digits on paper. Suddenly, the light dimmed. Outside, the sky hadn't changed, but Dorothy's vision blackened. She stumbled to the window for air. Nausea surged. She clutched the bed frame and gulped. When she steadied, she stacked the papers and slid them back into the envelope, but didn't return it to the hiding place. She tucked it into the inner pocket of her dress and pulled up the zipper. Her pulse hammered at her throat. If she left it there, everything could be erased. She shut the wardrobe, wiped her fingerprints from the wood, and left the room. Each step felt like a slice across bare soles. Down the hall, she heard Sarah's laugh in the kitchen. Robert said something, voice low, then both fell silent as if they sensed her. Dorothy paused and drew a breath. Ice crawled up her spine. These weren't vague signs anymore. This was a plan with signatures, money, dates, all in place to steal the home she had guarded with her life. A lock clicked open in her mind. Dorothy knew what she would do. She would no longer stand outside their whispers. She would walk into the eye of the storm herself. That afternoon, Dorothy pretended to go out for vegetables but lingered close to home. Her heart thudded like a drum. From behind the old tree across the street, she watched Robert and Sarah come out. Sarah wore a purple floral dress, the one Dorothy had bought her for her birthday. Robert walked close, leaning in to murmur. Sarah ducked her head, smiling, and reached to straighten his collar. The sight drenched Dorothy in ice water. She hid behind the trunk, every nerve screaming to leap out and shriek, but her legs stayed rooted. They got into a black car. Robert opened the door and bowed a little to let Sarah in first. That careful attention Dorothy hadn't received that since she turned 50. The car headed downtown. An hour later, Dorothy took the bus and followed. Near the notary office, she saw the black car parked out front. Reflections in the window showed them inside, heads close, whispering. Despite the harsh sun, Dorothy shivered. She clutched her bag and stepped closer. The window rolled down, and Robert's voice came out. Not a whisper this time, but clear. Dorothy is too naive. Once we trick her into signing the final document, it's done. Sarah nodded, laying her small hand on his and laughing softly. Her son will never suspect. It'll all go smoothly. The world swayed. Dorothy reached for a utility pole. A dull drone filled her ears. Words pounded like mallets. Too naive. Final signature. Done. In that moment she knew. Decades of sacrifice, sweat, hunger, every small asset she'd saved were punchlines to her husband and her daughter-in-law. She turned away and staggered. Each step on the sidewalk felt like glass. Her feet burned, but nothing hurt as much as her heart. By the time she reached home, it was dark. The smell of rice drifted from the kitchen. Sarah set the table. Robert read the paper as if nothing had happened. Both turned to her with smiles. Back already, Mom. Late day at the market. Those calm, cruel smiles made Dorothy's skin crawl. To them, she was still a puppet, a blurry old woman who cooked and cleaned while they handled real decisions. Dorothy sat. Her hands were icy. The spoon slipped and clinked against the bowl, and no one looked up. Robert and Sarah chatted about their future investments. Her tears fell silently into her rice. But inside, a new flame licked to life, the flame of waking up. That night, Dorothy didn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, counting the clock's hard ticks, each one jamming into her ribs. In her head, loops played, Robert squeezing Sarah's hand. I've waited too long. His flat voice discussing how to take everything. Dorothy clutched her chest, gasping, like even the air in her house had been poisoned with betrayal. Near dawn, she made a decision. She crept to Robert's study. In the drawer, among files, she found a small black USB drive. She wasn't tech-savvy, but instinct told her it held answers. She powered up the old laptop and plugged it in. A list of PDFs and audio files appeared. Dorothy opened one at random. Voices filled the room. Robert's deep, Sarah's soft. We need to wrap this up fast. Letting her drag it out wastes time. What if she finds out? She won't. Dorothy trusts me completely. All her life she's only known sacrifice, never betrayal. It's easy. Every word felt like an axe cleaving her chest. She bit down to keep from sobbing. In her reddened eyes, her husband and daughter-in-law became strangers calmly calculating on her back. She opened another file, the final sale contract, complete with photos of her house. In the margin, full transfer next quarter. Recipient, Sarah, broker, Robert. Page after page, sweat dripped onto the keyboard. At the end, Dorothy's signature, again, an even uglier forgery, but passable to the untrained eye. Dorothy sagged into the chair, body cold, stomach twisting, nausea surging to her throat. She covered her face and cried, a muffled animal sound leaking between her fingers. Years of quiet devotion paid back with filth. After a while, she wiped her eyes, pulled the USB, and slipped it into her pocket. From that moment, she couldn't pretend anymore. The truth blazed. Her husband and daughter-in-law had joined hands to strip her of the house, the soul of her life. Her hands trembled, but under the tremor a steady strength rose. The next morning, Dorothy acted normal. She cooked, cleaned, even smiled when Sarah asked, "Mom, what would you like to eat today? I'll cook." Dorothy answered gently, "I'll eat anything as long as the family's happy." Inside, every tendon was pulled taut. She was performing masking the quake behind a mild gaze, because now she knew, one hint of suspicion and they would erase the evidence. That noon, Robert left early for a supposed site meeting. Sarah claimed she needed kitchen supplies. Dorothy sat alone and listened to the clock. Then she followed them. She trailed Robert's car to a roadside hotel. Minutes later, Sarah arrived. They didn't hide. They walked in like lovers. Dorothy crouched behind a signboard, heart jackhammering, ears buzzing. The image carved her soul, the man she had shared a bed with and the daughter-in-law she had loved like blood, passing through the same door hand in hand. 1,000 sounds crashed in her head. Winter nights with a feverish child, poor meals, Robert's promise, "I'll take care of you forever," Sarah's sweet mom. All of it shattered like glass. Dorothy had no tears left. Her body numbed, her legs rooted. After a while, she turned and wandered away like a sleepwalker, afraid that one more second would drop her to the floor. That evening when they returned, they acted as if the day had been ordinary. Robert poured tea. Sarah chattered about shopping. Dorothy sat at the table, eyes bloodshot, smile frozen. Her bones felt cracked. Pain stabbed from every joint. Yet alongside the pain, a decision took shape. She would not be devoured. Near midnight, the house quiet, Dorothy knelt at the family altar and looked at her parents' portraits through a blur of tears. She whispered, "I tried to keep this family together, but I was wrong. The ones I trusted most deceived me." The candle flickered. Her shaking shadow danced on the wall. Dorothy felt like a ghost in her own home. In her mind, layers of truth stacked. The transfer papers, the USB recordings, Robert and Sarah walking into a hotel. Dorothy is naive. One more signature and it's done. Each piece cut deeper. She couldn't breathe. Her chest seized. She clutched the table and sobbed. Then a thought sparked. If I collapse, they win. This house, these years will be erased. No, I will not fall. Dorothy stood, wiped her face, and took the envelope and USB from their hiding place. She locked them in a small metal box and hid it where only she would know. The next day, Dorothy went to a lawyer. Hands shaking, she set the documents and the USB on his desk. He read for a long time, his face growing grave. Finally, he looked up and said clearly, "Mrs. Dorothy, what you've brought me is proof of an intentional property fraud. Your signature was forged. They are moving to seize your entire house." Dorothy clenched her hands until they turned blue. The lawyer continued, "If you want, we can stop this immediately, but be prepared this will mean a fierce confrontation at home." Her heart hurt, but for the first time in weeks, her eyes lit. This was the threshold. Stay silent and lose everything, or stand up and fight. She stepped out of the office with the wind tugging her graying hair. For the first time, she felt she wasn't just a frail wife or a tired mother. A voice rose inside her. "I will not let them destroy my life. Never." Evening fell. The house was unusually quiet. Dorothy laid a thick stack of papers square in the center of the dining table. Under the yellow light, the red titles screamed, "Transfer Contract, Power of Attorney, Deposit Receipt." Robert stepped in, still untying his shoes, and froze. Sarah came behind him with a bag of groceries. Both stared at the table, faces drained. Dorothy stood straight, palms on the table's edge. Her voice was steel. "You two! How do you explain this?" The room locked up. The ticking clock hammered the air. Robert forced a smile, trying to recover. "Dorothy, let me explain. This is a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Dorothy cut in, her voice shaking but hard. "Is my forged signature a misunderstanding? Selling the house to Sarah, is that a misunderstanding?" Sarah set the bag down with a thud, face flushing then paling. She stammered, "Mom, it's not what you think." Dorothy slammed her hand on the table. Papers flew up. "Not what I think. I heard it. I saw it. How long did you plan to keep lying?" Robert's face pinched. He snapped, "Fine. If you already know, I won't hide it. Yes, Sarah and I discussed it. You're old. You don't understand what this house is worth. Letting you keep it is a waste." His blunt confession was a punch to her ribs. Dorothy staggered, but her eyes blazed. Robert, we clawed through poverty together. I built this house with blood and tears. What right do you have to take it from me? Sarah shot back, voice sharp. Mom, what do you need this rundown house for? Sell it and we'll have money, a better life. Why are you so stubborn? Dorothy turned, eyes like knives. Be quiet. From the day you stepped here, I treated you like a daughter, and you... Her voice broke. You stabbed me in the back with my own husband. Sarah lowered her head, lips quivering with anger. Robert stepped forward, voice hardening. Dorothy, you have to understand. Times have changed. We need to think about the future. You cling to the past. Your stubbornness forced my hand. Dorothy laughed, a bitter metallic sound in the hush. The future? Whose future? Yours and your daughter-in-law's. And me, the woman who kept this family alive. What am I to you? The room's air tightened to a breaking point. Outside, wind rattled the windows, matching Dorothy's racing heart. The real confrontation had begun. Robert slammed the table, papers scattered. He roared, Dorothy, don't think I have no rights. I'm your husband, father to your son. I have a say in this house. Dorothy glared at him, voice hoarse with fury. Rights? What rights does a traitor have, one who teams up with his own daughter-in-law to seize what I bled for? Sarah stepped forward, cheeks blazing. Mom, don't be unreasonable. I'm planning for our future. You're old. You don't understand big decisions. Let Dad and me handle it. Shut up. Dorothy's shout cracked like thunder. Who are you to decide for me? I let you into this home, let you call me Mom, and you drive a knife into my back. Sarah blanched, then her eyes flashed. She said, crisp and cold, Fine. Yes, Dad and I planned it, because you're weak and naive. A few papers and you almost lost everything. If you were smarter, this wouldn't have happened. The room exploded in silence. Dorothy's face burned, blood roared in her ears. She shook, but her gaze never left the two betrayers. Robert, she choked. Do you remember that rainy night when I sold my only earrings to save our son? Do you remember me bent over fields and fabric to keep this family afloat? Was all of that only to be repaid with this? Robert looked away, then barked, Enough. You always live in the past. The past won't feed us. I want a new life, not shackles made of old, poor memories. Dorothy's laugh was sharp. Tears slid down her cheeks. So my sacrifices, the things that kept us alive, were shackles to you. Thunder rolled outside. The window flew open. Wind slammed into the room and sent the papers whirling. Lightning flashed over three faces. A woman robbed of all trust. A man hiding from his own reflection. A daughter-in-law whose eyes gleamed with calculation. No more sweet lies. It was time for the truth to stand bare. The storm outside braided with the storm within. Dorothy stood tall, pointing at Robert, voice trembling, but tempered like steel. You can be poor. You can fail. But you do not get to make me a joke. I staked my life on you and you, with my daughter-in-law, plot to steal my home. Robert narrowed his eyes, voice dropping with threat. Dorothy, if you keep this up, you'll lose everything. Don't test me. Sarah poured oil on the fire. That's right, Mom. If you keep resisting, this house won't save you. The law is on my side now. The papers are signed. Dorothy pulled a small USB from her pocket and held it high. Forged papers. Full recordings. I have them all here. Want to go to court? Let's see who the law protects. The room froze. Robert's eyes blazed. Sarah went pale, lips trembling. They hadn't expected the meek woman to strike back. Dorothy stepped closer, voice breaking with rage and pain. You think I'm blind? You think I'm mute? No. I saw. I heard. I kept everything. The silence you despised is the knife that will cut your lies. Robert lunged for the USB, but Dorothy was quicker, clenching it tight. She screamed, Don't touch me! You're no husband of mine! You're a traitor conspiring with our daughter-in-law to destroy me! Sarah panicked and hissed to Robert, Do something, she'll ruin everything! Robert's fists curled, his face twisted with fury. But faced with Dorothy's blazing eyes, he faltered. In that moment, the man she'd once trusted shrank to a petty coward. The house rang with tension, taut as a wire. Rain began to drum on the roof, beating time to the climax. Dorothy declared, voice so firm that both of them blanched. "I've endured enough. From today on, no one steps on me. Not my husband, not my daughter-in-law, no one." Thunder answered. Dorothy stepped back, the USB clenched in her fist, her eyes sharp as blades on Robert and Sarah. "You can deceive me. You can forge my name. But don't think I'll be silent. I've already seen a lawyer. The law will lay your tricks bare." Robert went pale and tried to soften. "Dorothy, you're overreacting. We're still married. You don't want our son to know, do you?" Dorothy laughed, a bitter clink of metal. "Married? What husband holds his daughter-in-law's hand and whispers, 'I've waited too long'? What husband teams up with her to take everything from his wife? You're no husband of mine, Robert. You're a traitor." Sarah clenched her teeth, eyes sparking. "Say whatever you want. You can't keep this house forever. Even with evidence, you'll only tear the family apart." Dorothy spun, her voice thunder loud. "Family! The family shattered the moment you touched hands in the dark. I died right then. What's left for me to lose?" Robert flushed with rage. "Fine. If it's war you want, it's war. Don't blame me for being ruthless." Dorothy didn't flinch. She stood rooted like a gray mountain. Tears fell, but her voice rang. "I won't break. I've beaten hunger, illness, and back-breaking years. You think I'll fall to your betrayal? No. You're the ones who should be afraid." Lightning lit her face, agonized, resolute. Robert and Sarah stood mute. In that instant, Dorothy knew she was no longer the quiet woman she'd been. She had become a storm, ready to strip their lies away. Outside, rain washed down like sheets, rinsing the illusions. Inside, the first battle ended, but Dorothy's fire had only just been lit. After the storm, Dorothy sat listening to the soft drip from the eaves. Her whole body ached as if she'd fought a war of blood and tears. Yet in her reddened eyes, a new light sparked, resolve. She took out the metal box and opened it. Documents, the USB, evidence of betrayal. Her fingers touched each piece like a weeping wound. But this time she didn't cry. She drew a long breath and whispered, "I won't let them take anything more." The next day she returned to the lawyer. She sat straighter. Her voice no longer shook. "I want to change my will. None of my property will ever fall into Robert's or Sarah's hands." The lawyer nodded, respect in his eyes. "That's wise. You have enough evidence. I'll proceed at once." Dorothy signed, each stroke decisive. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the feel of cutting through the chains that had bound her for decades. Back home, Robert and Sarah sat in the living room. They looked up, wary. Dorothy walked past without a word. She set down her basket, lit the kettle, cooked a small soup. Inside, a door slammed shut. She was no longer the compliant wife, no longer the mother who only knew how to give. Dorothy had climbed from the pit of betrayal and stood ready to fight for her right to live. A few days later, she went to the bank and opened a safe deposit box. She placed the documents, USB, and new will inside. When she signed the register, her hand was steady. The clerk handed her a tiny key, and Dorothy closed her fingers around it like a piece of her life retrieved. Back home, she walked into the living room where Robert and Sarah whispered. She set the key on the table and said calm and firm, "From today on, I'm nobody's puppet. Your schemes are useless. The law stands with me, not you." Robert froze, anger flickering, but he didn't explode. Sarah went pale, hands twisting at her hem. Dorothy met their eyes. "I've revised my will. This property will never fall into a traitor's hands. If either of you moves one step further, I'll take everything to court." In that moment, she saw fear in Robert's eyes. The man she'd trusted now looked like a criminal cornered. Sarah bit her lip, masking panic, but despair leaked through. Dorothy turned away and ended it. "You thought I was weak, easy to manage. You forgot that I built this home, and only I have the right to protect it." She walked off, back straight, heavy steps, proud steps. Wind rustled at the eaves, and Dorothy felt it. A new era of her life had begun. That night, Dorothy sat on the porch alone, moonlight whitening the lines of her face. A cool breeze combed her silver hair, and for once she didn't feel cold. After years of trampling, her heart had found its strong beat again. She remembered the worst days selling her earrings, cutting grain till her back split, holding her feverish son under a leaking roof. She had believed that sacrifice would be guarded by the love and loyalty of those closest to her. Now she understood. Some people are not worthy of your sacrifice. Dorothy clenched her hands. No more tears, only resolve. She would live for herself now and guard this house as she would her soul. Not Robert. Not Sarah. No one would touch it again. A door opened softly behind her. Robert stepped out. He started to speak, but seeing Dorothy upright in the moonlight, he froze. She didn't turn her head. Her voice cut clean. "Don't come closer. And the law is behind me now. You have no rights here anymore." Robert stiffened, then slunk back inside. Dorothy closed her eyes and drew a deep breath. She felt it clearly. She was no longer the gentle wife of years past. She was Dorothy, a woman betrayed who now stood tall before those who wished to ruin her. One morning, Dorothy rose early to tidy the dusty bookshelf in Robert's room. When she pulled out the bottom drawer, a yellowed envelope slid to the floor. She picked it up. On the front, scrawled words, "Under no circumstances let Dorothy know." Her heart lurched. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside lay a stack of old letters, paper browned and ink blurred. Dorothy read, each sentence a blade. They were from Robert to a woman named Margaret, yet Sarah's name appeared again and again. One line burned. "I can't let Dorothy know the truth. Sarah is not just her daughter-in-law. Sarah carries my blood. It's a secret we must keep to the grave." Dorothy reeled. As sound receded, darkness crowded her vision. Her knees went weak and she dropped into a chair. She remembered everything, their two intimate glances, the slippery words, their uncanny bond. It all clicked into place, sickeningly clear. Sarah wasn't only her daughter-in-law, she was Robert's daughter. Dorothy broke down, a raw cry tearing the quiet room. The betrayal had already been monstrous. This truth was blacker still, not only infidelity, not only theft, but a sin hidden for years. She stared out the window. Morning light poured in, but for Dorothy, darkness swallowed her soul. She whispered, "Dear God, what am I supposed to do with this truth?" And the story closed there, a door left open to haunt. Because Dorothy knew her war wasn't over. Secrets left unburied would summon a greater storm waiting just ahead,